Happy Friday. You've made it through another week. Congratulations and welcome to another discovery session, which is where we get together to hear about the latest and greatest in energy efficiency. I'm sure a lot of you know the drill by now, but the way this works is we hand the floor over for a 20 or 25-minute presentation, and then the rest of the time is for your questions as the audience. Our only request for your questions is no sales pitches and no statements disguised as questions. Throughout the presentation, you can feel free to put your questions into the Q&A box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. You're also welcome to go in and give a thumbs up to any questions you really want to see answered, and then we'll prioritize those in the Q&A period. So just so everyone knows, if you haven't met me yet, my name is Kirsten, and today's actually my last day as the Community Engagement Manager with Efficiency Canada, but I'm very happy to get to spend my last day with all of you. It's awesome to get to join the call with everyone today. And I'm calling in from Ottawa, which is the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Nation. We're joined today by Donovan, Woollard, and Michelle Bonner, who will be talking about overcoming inertia to drive a home electrification movement in British Columbia. So I'm really excited to hear what that's all about, and I will pass the floor to you.
Thanks, Kirsten. Really pleased to be here today, and I'll kick things off before handing it over to Donovan. But excited to help share the highlights of this research. I'll share a little context about Vancity and what brings us to this collaboration, and then I'll pass it over to Donovan. But first, wanted to acknowledge that I'm calling in from the lands of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations in what's known as Vancouver, and want to pay my respects to elders past and present for their stewardship of these lands. And with that, a little bit about Vancity. Thanks, Donovan. So Vancity is the largest credit union in Canada, and we serve communities primarily in southwestern BC. And we have over 500,000 member owners of the credit union and have over $30 billion in assets and assets under management. And we strive to be a financial force for change. We serve the financial needs of our members and work with members and community partners to affect systemic change and address big problems where we live, such as inequity and climate change. Next slide, please, Donovan. Great. So in early 2021, Vancity made 5 commitments around climate change, and 2 are particularly relevant to today's presentation. One is to bring all our financed emissions to net zero by 2040. That means that the carbon emitted from anything we finance needs to be eliminated or significantly reduced, with any remaining emissions being brought to net zero. As part of that commitment, Vancity is actually, we can just stay there for a sec. Thanks. As part of that commitment, Vancity is a signatory to both the UN Principles for Responsible Banking's collective commitment to climate action, and the UN-convened Net Zero Banking Alliance. We were the first Canadian financial institution to join the Net Zero Banking Alliance in early 2021. We also recognize that how we get to net zero is just as important as reaching that target. And so we're also committed to financing an equitable climate transition. And we're focusing our work in financial and social inclusion to help people who are affected by the climate emergency, as well as those seeking support in transitioning to a cleaner and more sustainable living. Okay, next slide. So given that the majority of Vancity's lending is in mortgages, our pathway to net zero is definitely via buildings. At least 78% of the financed emissions on our balance sheet, as opposed to investments we manage on behalf of our members, are from buildings. And I say at least because we know there are some building emissions tied to business loans that we can't yet account for, and some building types like industrial, where we don't yet have a way to calculate. So we know that's a minimum. And about 19% of those emissions is from residential mortgages, and ground-oriented homes account for the vast majority of those emissions. And inside those emissions, most of them can be attributed to the natural gas used in the buildings and homes we finance. So next slide. Thanks. And as many of the people here today know, the story is similar in BC more broadly. Provincially, buildings account for around 12% of our GHG emissions, and that number is close to 60 in urban areas like Vancouver. On the way to net zero by 2050, a number of provincial, regional, and local governments have interim targets for 2030 that call for reductions in the range of 50% in building operating emissions. It's a little higher for the provincial target. And as Donovan will share with you shortly, Open's research helps to understand the opportunity and challenge in decarbonizing ground-oriented homes. And our research shows that 77% of the homes surveyed heat with natural gas and 71% for domestic hot water. So it points to the need for a dramatic reduction in natural gas from buildings. And in ground-oriented homes, this means a conversion to electricity, of space and water heating, and building new homes without a reliance on gas. Next slide. I wanted to share a little bit about what Vancity is doing about this and how we're taking action on ground-oriented homes. And this list will continue to grow as we continue to move toward our net zero targets. But we have a suite of loan products at preferable rates to support homeowners to retrofit. We also offer top-ups on provincial and municipal rebates for EnerGuide home evaluations. And we're soon going to be making advice on reducing energy and carbon emissions available to our members. Stay tuned for more on that in the coming weeks. Vancity also returns 30% of our profits to our members and the communities we serve. And we're able to use some of those shared success grant funds to help create the enabling environment needed to reach all of our net zero targets and commitments to an equitable transition. We have some fantastic community partnerships on the go, and we recognize that we needed to better understand homeowners' experience and how Vancity can best support them to deeply retrofit. And that led us to our partnership with Open, who is also asking questions in this area to partner on this project and do this research. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Donovan, to share the highlights of what we learned.
Thanks very much, Michelle. It's been tremendous working with Vancity and the rest of the project team on this. And it's also a tremendous honor to be speaking to you all today, also from the traditional and unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish nations. I've been very privileged to spend most of my adult life working and playing and living in this territory. And with the work of Open and previous activities, really trying to enhance the level of stewardship that it's seen over the last several generations, unfortunately, and try to align in reconciliation with what this territory could truly be. And so, yeah, it's, for those that know us already, nice to see you again. Thanks for joining us. And for those of you that are meeting Open for the first time, we're a Vancouver-based software company that is both mission and business aligned fundamentally in helping the people that shape our cities to make pro-climate decisions, and to do it with the confidence that comes from being able to activate really complex data sets about building energy performance, identifying market leverage points, and in this case, identifying a lot of market friction points that prevent us from moving our built environment to where we need it to be if we're going to be consistent with those targets that Michelle talked about. So we do engage individual actors to a degree, but a lot of our focus is on the structural change, because if we're going to get to net zero in a very quick time frame, we really need to be working with the people that can move those markets, the regulators, the policymakers, the incentive program designers, the capital providers that, through their actions, if allocated where they could be most effective, we can get the biggest climate bang for our buck, if you will, in a positive way. So as Michelle talked about, we have a lot of work ahead of us in looking at the built environment of BC. 12% of today's emissions across the province come from the operations, not the construction, not the embodied emissions, but the operations of our buildings. And that's much, much more in the urban areas. And so homeowners are well aware of this. And yet we're not yet seeing the action that we want to see. And we're going to give a little bit more detail about that emerged from the research. So we set out on this research project with our partners to really understand, put ourselves into the mind frame of a homeowner to understand what are the blockers, friction points, and leverage points that they face in maximizing the energy efficiency and also decarbonizing their homes. And as expected, a lot of those friction points are pretty fundamental. We're also speaking mostly today, and with the report that, full disclosure, we were hoping would come out earlier this week, but it is going to come out probably next week. And so the focus of that report and summarizing this research and making the recommendations, many of those are focused on policymakers and program designers and what role they can play in getting us to this point. But all is not lost. My colleague Justine is hopefully in a minute or two going to put in the chat a link to where you can sign up to receive the report in your inbox when it comes out in the next couple of weeks or even next week. So what is the research? For the last 9 months or so, we've gone through a series of phases of really trying to understand the mindset of individual homeowners that have started down the pathway of a renovation or retrofit, sometimes reached a successful conclusion, sometimes reached a successful conclusion they weren't as happy with. Sometimes they barely got out of the starting blocks. So really understanding the motivational drivers and the experience as they go. We coupled that with a quantitative survey of about almost 900 homeowners. And in this case, really trying to get an understanding of the installed base that we were starting with, right? So what is the space and water heating equipment by fuel type, by equipment type, and I think also quite interestingly by age. And so that context is what I'm going to be primarily talking to you here about today. So the action we need to get to our 50% reduction by 2030 and well beyond that is we must rapidly electrify. We have 77% of our homes that rely upon gas as their primary source, and we need to dramatically reduce that. And we can frame the conversation about what is probably either the best opportunity or the biggest lost opportunity is if you look at the age profile of the boilers and furnaces in the territory in the study region. Many of those, like 31% today, and almost 2/3 by the time 2030 comes around, are going to be aging into the range, 15 years plus, where a lot of the conventional wisdom from industry is that if you're running into troubles, you're going to run into troubles quick, and replacement should really be on your priority list. So that is really the focus of how we can focus, because if we can get those 2/3 out by 2030, then we're well on our way to getting to our ultimate goal. We did focus on domestic hot water in the study. Today, though, I'm going to mostly just talk about space heating. And so it's useful to see if our focus is on retrofitting and taking existing homes that are gas reliant and making them otherwise, it's useful to get a sense of what the challenge is in front of us. So the 77% that Michelle talked about and that I've mentioned, if we look at that by vintage of home, then we can see that it was even more dominant until about the 1990s. And then the share of electric has increased from there. And that means both baseboards as well as 45% of the heat pumps that are in our study set are also in homes built since particularly the 2000s. We do see, if you look at sort of like the mid-range green, which is the heat pump curve, we have seen some successful transitions from gas to heat pump that are captured in there. But it's very safe to say that it's much easier to build, purpose built than it is to convert because it is challenging. And one of the things that we tried to look into is who is the typical heat pump owner? And we found that there isn't a typical heat pump owner. And we looked at age, we looked at various demographic profiles, we looked at household income, and we also looked at pro-climate motivations. And this is the only place where we actually did start to see some interesting correlations, but they were not what one might have expected. if looked at the people that were consistent with a motivational profile to factor in pro-climate, pro-planet, and sustainable living motivations, those that exhibited that the most strongly were actually underrepresented relative to the average British Columbian in likelihood of having a heat pump. And even more interestingly to me, the group that was the least likely to factor planet and sustainable living into their purchase decisions was by 2.5 times more likely than the average British Columbian to end up with a heat pump. And that is, we believe, consistent with the fact that they are very strongly correlated with the typical heat pump home, which, if we look across our study set, trends quite heavily towards detached homes versus, as opposed to, townhouses and triplexes, possibly suggesting, more options for outside unit locations. They trended to be larger than the average home. They tended, probably for similar reasons, to be outside of the urban core of Vancouver, on the Fraser Valley and South Vancouver Island, and they tended to be newer, built since 2000. This is also a housing type that is, fairly well represented in the pool of buildings that already have mechanical cooling. Relative to a lot of Canada, British Columbia is a pretty temperate climate. So we only have today about 30% of our homes that have some form of air conditioning. But, especially after last year's heat dome, and we conducted this research several months after it, that number is likely to at least double. 37% said, that don't want to do that again. And we're actually having policy and regulation coming out to, reflect and reward mechanical cooling in a lot of housing types. And today, if we look at the distribution of heat pumps being used for cooling amongst the total air conditioning, it's about 37% already. And in fact, of those that are considering moving into getting cooling for their buildings going forward, heat pumps are well understood and well appreciated. And this is, we took to be an interesting, there's a bit of a conventional wisdom, if you will, that, heat pumps is a bad name if you want people to understand that these are actually really good cooling devices, and you should factor that into your financial approach. We found, at least at this stage, and there have been some marketing campaigns around this, and there have been more people looking into how they can avoid another, suffering experience from a heat dome. As it stands today, for those that don't yet own a heat pump, but are at least aware of it, 75% of those understood the cooling ability to be one of the key features of that, which again, really proves that there's an exciting leverage point there for policymakers to consider and campaigners to consider. But that's enough of the good news. So so let's get back into the challenges. And so now we're leaning into what the homeowner experience and unpacking the homeowner experience so that we can unpack how to invigorate more of it. And to summarize it, it does make sense to look at it as a classic systems level problem. We have widely distributed emissions across our building stock, and we have low motivation relative to the level of complexity to do something about it. For many homeowners, gas furnaces do a wonderful job, and the gas furnace support industry does a very wonderful job in keeping them, warm. You put it in your basement, you set it and forget it, and fairly affordable, reliable heat comes out of your walls, and it only becomes a problem when it becomes a problem. And the complexity of doing otherwise is going to be the theme that we go from here. So in understanding the homeowner journey, we listened and we unpacked into a few distinct stages that I'm going to lay out in a somewhat idealized fashion and in a very linear fashion, but it doesn't always flow continuously, and it doesn't always flow in this order. But there are these distinct phases that it's useful to try to understand as we're looking at how somebody gets from triggering event to the ultimate installation of a energy saving measures on their building envelope, through their building envelope, or replacement of equipment. So we have our triggering event. Ideally, it's a family just deciding that they want to decarbonize. It often isn't that. And then there's an exploratory phase of like, what are all the possible options for things that we could do in this home or in a home? And then, that converges into some diagnostics where here we're starting to think about, what can I do in the specifics of my home, with its, 100-year-old envelope and its, ductwork and my budget and all these sorts of things. And then, who are the industry participants that can help me to, really understand the specifics of, the type of equipment, for example, that will work in here, and then provide me some good price, and I can compare those prices. And then ultimately I pick the one that I want to go forward with and install. So these are sort of like the stages that, one can understand and break them apart. And then we can look at, how true to life is people's real experience of that. So I'll start with equipment replacement. And it's not very true to that, because more than 60% of the equipment replacements in the last 5 years took place when either their heating system broke down, and it never breaks down in August, like it breaks down on a cold February night, or they came to believe that they were at risk of imminent breakdown. So this is a much more expedited process of finding out. And in this case, we have this teeny little homeowner journey from triggering event, my God, it's getting cold, to literally 24 hours later in some instances, or less, the installation of a new heating system. Really not a lot of time for collecting information, doing some diagnostics about what my alternative options might be, or even indeed getting multiple quotes for getting that replacement furnace, if indeed that is, and 99 at least % of the time that is what it is. It's a like for like replacement. So through our interviews and focus groups, a sense of it's a low power transaction, paying emergency fees, which is really not very helpful, and ultimately locking in gas for another generation. And for a lot of households that don't carry a dedicated repair and maintenance budget, which is one of the drivers why this deferred replacement takes place, that's a big hit. We also observed consistently a reluctance to decommission equipment while it was still pumping out heat, or a reluctance to send perfectly good equipment to the landfill. A bunch of different motivations for that, but it can sometimes lead to playing a game of furnace chicken, if you will, which is fun for a while, but can run people into trouble. Looking at the conservation measures more broadly, so envelope upgrades, or just whether it's motivated by planet and climate, say clearly that's rarely the core driver of a project so far. Whether it's driven by increasing the asset value of your home, whether it's driven by preventative maintenance or thermal comfort, all of those are present in decision making, but far and away what we heard from our interviews is that the driver of what drove them to take on a retrofit or a renovation was gaining functionality in their home in the face of changing usage patterns. Families are growing, COVID and shifts in the workforce are leading more and more people to work from home, but not having the opportunity to move up in size in the face of very high real estate prices in this region. And so again and again, we heard about people, that were reclaiming an attic space or reclaiming a space in the garage as a workshop or an office, or, trying to punch out an extra sleeping room. Those were the places that people were putting their money to work because, it's a sense of, urgency and where possible, there were some conservation measures that were brought along with that, but again, not the central driver. Okay, so after we've had our triggering event, and now we're in the, okay, now what, through install, the key word we can attach to many people's experiences is frustration. There was a very, very high reliance upon HVAC contractors as even the primary information source, not just the diagnostic and specification, but the primary information source. More people do seem to be starting to use things like Better Homes BC, but it wasn't voluntarily revealed as a source in many instances. And so this puts people in a sense of very high reliance for defining the sense of possible on people that they're just meeting. They felt that there wasn't a sense of choice there wasn't a sense of maybe alignment and, project and mission alignment, or trust in the form of testimonials from other customers that they could see, that led them to really feel, like they were, safely putting all of their eggs in this particular basket. When it comes to decarbonizing, there's only a few names on the provincial list of accredited and certified contractors that have found the business case to make that their focus, and we look forward to there being many more. But so really, people are in the position of saying, whoever calls me back, and whoever calls me back the second time, we're going with them, whether we like it or not. And this raises this issue of feeling alone through the process. If we flip that the other way and we look at the people that had a very happy outcome and had a very happy process, that was very, very strongly correlated with having a much higher than average total project budget and relatively lower complexity. So if your job is big enough to have a general contractor that can, help with the education, help with the diagnosis and selection of trades and installers all the way through, then, that's a much easier position than if you're trying to compare, how do I replace my gas furnace? That's easily done if I just make a call to an installer. But if I actually want to retrofit my home to a heat pump option, I'm introducing a ton of new complexity, from ductwork to panel to everything like that in between, or a lot of new complexity, I should say, but only slightly more cost. And so that puts us into this sort of red zone where people are grappling with that complexity on their own, and some new form of intermediation might be useful because, the status quo is not working for homeowners, or indeed for the contractors that are motivated to get people warm, to save money, and to move on to the next job, and to keep the machine moving. So key take-home message: we need to overcome the inertia. We need to change both the rate of equipment replacement, and we need to change the nature. So right now, about 4 to 5% of British Columbians are turning over their furnace or boilers each year, which is why we have so many in the 20 to 25 year plus range of age. We need to get that at least to 8% of today's installed base. And we need that to not be 99% like for like replacements. We need that to be 100% conversions to highly efficient electric systems, so that we have, the installed base of furnaces going down, as over the course of, even 15 years, if we set a 15-year replacement target, heat pump market share going up correspondingly. But unfortunately, the retrofit journey today does not facilitate proactive decarbonization. Homeowners need help. These are complex projects. They're doable, they're essential, but they're challenging. And if we miss this opportunity, we lock in GHG emissions for another generation. So what are the leverage points? All those deep green opportunities, the long standing furnaces that have done a wonderful job, and we should salute them. Let's let them go to retirement. Let's continue to harness, the market power and the opportunities around mechanical cooling as a driver of heat pump adoptions. And let's, as it continues a renovation boom and the market is shifting, let's try to make sure that, whether it's through the permit process or other things, we're taking advantage of those opportunities to make contact with homeowners that are, actively and literally ripping out their walls. So homeowners are doing a great job, and they need help. And so our recommendations for the policymakers and program designers are to, again, shift the balance of, motivation and barriers and complexity to a place where things can flow. And motivation, can continue to come from external drivers, hopefully not emergency replacements anymore, but time of replacement policies, that are a necessary but not sufficient way to, make sure that we get the right type of equipment replacement when the time comes. But as we've seen, isn't enough on its own to increase the rate of replacement to what we need it to be. And then we also need to address, the barriers and the complexity side of the equation. There is an affordability gap. It's one thing to just talk about how do we achieve price parity between a like for like replacement with gas versus a heat pump. But then there's also the comparison with all the jobs that aren't getting done because so many, British Columbians are, mortgaged to the teeth, and are dealing with other things in their day-to-day life. And so the comparison, not just with the job for job, but the jobs that aren't happening, there is a financial component to that. We need better sources of information. The status quo is not working for the homeowners or for the contractors that are looking at spending 18 months in bringing people up to speed and maybe not getting an install out of it. And so in this respect, looking at new forms of intermediation is a critical step. And this is a place where we encourage you to stay in touch with Open. This is where we see ourselves having some value to provide, and then continue to do more of what we're doing. Accelerate contractor accreditation, expand the list of people that are ready to do heat pumps, ready to decarbonize, and can step into the breach. And also just let people know that their gas equipment will achieve an appropriate send-off. And so with that in mind, I'm going to thank you very much for listening. I'm going to invite you again to please sign up to receive the report. We'd love your feedback. And so again, thanks to not just Michelle and her team, but also Theo from the Open team, Lindsay and Majid at Circular City, James and Sarah, who worked on the graphic elements of this. It's been a wonderful project. Thanks very much.
Awesome, thank you both. There are a lot of questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to jump right into things. I will say one I'm seeing a lot is folks requesting to see the report when it comes out, and so the best way is with that link shared by Justine, right? Yeah, awesome. Okay, so if you're looking for the report, you sign up right there. If you want to go in and give a thumbs up to any questions you'd like to see answered, then we can prioritize that way. So our top question here from Brendan right now: would Vancity rather loan to individual homeowners or to an energy service company retrofitting a bunch of homes at the same time? And if it's the latter, could the banking sector play a role in encouraging business models that take risk away from homeowners and get paid for energy performance?
I can answer that one. Thanks, Brendan. So we'd be interested in doing both, I would say. And our subsidiary, the Vancity Community Investment Bank, has experience financing ESCOs for large residential buildings. We don't yet have experience with that model with single family and ground-oriented homes. So we're definitely watching and trying to understand what financial tools will help our members move. And so we'll continue to obviously explore this. And just acknowledging, the research really did show that financing is one piece, but really helping homeowners sort the complexity of the experience and understanding what they need to do is a big part of solving this puzzle too. So financing is part of it, but not the only answer.
Did you want to jump in, Donovan?
Yeah, just like there were a bunch of questions around, how much of a barrier, affordability is one thing, like, can I afford to take on financing? But for my source of financing, and a fairly consistent response is most people, because they didn't have these preventive, maintenance budgets, were hoping to, make investments that they could do out of their savings, and where they were looking to do, to finance some projects, that they saw that they would go back to the bankers that they had relationships with already. And so, looking at the question of, HELOCs or other different types of funding and financing, certainly, getting more information and more sources of capital and low cost capital, like through PACE and things like that is useful. But I think in addition to, that cost barrier, there is this complexity barrier, and there's also this motivation barrier.
Awesome, thank you. And when you got to the slides about the psychographic profiles, there's quite a few questions and some discussion in the chat. So Ray is wondering, in terms of the research on the types of people who install heat pumps, does your research mostly show that it's people who live in large suburban homes who are installing heat pumps, or rather is it more tied to that specific value orientation or psychographic profile?
Yeah, and that point is really, and it's never comfortable to talk about types of people. So forgive any clumsiness with the language there. But we certainly found that there is a type of home that is very, correlated with having heat pumps, much more than there is a type of person, by, various ways that statisticians could define it in that way. And so, that really, I think, again, speaks to the importance of not just using homeowners as the locus of like, hey, guys, like, carry your load, please. But really, different types of homes are better suited. And it's a harder job, a necessary job, but it's a harder job to get certain types of homes better equipped with low carbon options.
Perfect. And a question here about data. So Brendan's wondering if you can comment on why you needed to do a survey to get the data and how it was collected. And then he's wondering, shouldn't we have this info readily available at a national level?
Yes, we certainly should. We felt that it was useful for our own research to just understand, like if we're going to, and I think as a company, we're mostly interested in equipment replacements. And if we're going to, get much more happening in terms of equipment replacements, we want to better understand the installed base, by type, by age, and factors like that. And then as we started to scour around, there is some research out there, not much of it is public, and not much of it has some of these elements, like age, for example. And so, that's why we are making this public. And so if it can be useful, it's very useful to us. And if it can be useful to other people, then great. And we'd be happy to talk to people about doing it in other regions as well.
Awesome, thank you. A lot of questions in here about financing. So a question here from Keshua. What are the most promising financing mechanisms for deep carbon retrofits in BC? Is it PACE, using a HELOC, ESCOs, something else? What's the best financing mechanism you've seen?
I think I have to say, I think we don't know yet. I think there's, it's early days and there's lots of different models that are developing and that need more explanation or exploration, I should say. So I'm sorry not to have a more definitive answer, but I think we just don't know. I can't point to one and say that'll work better than another.
Yeah, it's a great answer. Sometimes we just don't know, and then we'll figure it out. So a question here from Jerry. So slightly off topic, but a question again for Michelle, the financial community. In the US, there are home mortgages that offer reduced mortgage rates for energy efficient homes. Are there plans for similar Vancity products where mortgage rate reductions are based on lower energy used in the home?
We don't at this point have a mortgage with preferable rates for a home that's lower energy or for a homeowner that wants to do a big retrofit. Under our PlanetWise suite of products, we do make available a credit line mortgage, a term loan. I'm missing one other type of a loan right off the top of my head. We don't have a mortgage yet, but as I said before, we're watching and trying to understand which tools will work better. And then just back to that, being mindful that we need to pair the financing with other solutions.
Perfect. And again, on the financing side, so can lower interest loans be provided for non-energy projects that improve functionality, for example, when combined with an energy improvement to provide a carrot to owners?
So I can say that in back to our PlanetWise suite, and in that scenario, if a member came to us and wanted to do a project that was a renovation and included some functionality and also was going to achieve energy efficiency, that could be made under that loan. Yeah, and we know we need to provide ways like that for homeowners to move more quickly.
Awesome. And a question here about your, the very last point in your last slide. Can you provide any more details about the recycling of old gas equipment?
Yeah, and one of the nice things, for a project like this is that we make life a little bit easy for ourselves. But, this is a primary research project of just listening to people and their challenges. And so, and actually, as we were doing this report and doing this presentation, we're always trying to catch ourselves, where are we editorializing, with our own preferences versus what the data is just telling us and what the homeowners we talk to are just telling us. So that led us to, step away from prescriptions in some places and instead just really focus on highlighting problems, especially the ones that emerged that we didn't see coming. So it seems like I'm kind of punting on the answer to this, and I kind of am, but I'm also kind of not. I think that's a great piece of work for somebody to take on, but it was out of scope for this project. But it was certainly very interesting how often that came up, whether it was, motivated by, sort of like the waste not, want not motivation, or the planetary motivation, or some other things. Pulling out a perfectly good furnace and putting it in the landfill was a concept that really resonated with a lot of people, and that we spent a lot of time in the focus groups discussing that. So I can't offer a solution on it, but I'll just daylight it as something we heard very, very clearly.
And so a question here on the workforce side of things. So who do you consider, or how does someone get accredited as a heat pump installer?
Want to take that, Michelle?
Yeah, I'm very happy to point in BC, the Home Performance Stakeholder Council has created and is convening the Home Performance Contractor Network. And in order to be a member of that network, contractors have to meet certain criteria and around accreditation, and they need to take different levels of training around understanding the home as a system. And it's working to ensure that we have contractors in BC that are able to do this work, and that homeowners are able to find them. And so I can plop a link. Oh, thanks, Corey. So they're doing great work, and it's worth checking out the Home Performance Contractor Network. And if you were to go to Clean BC's Better Homes site for incentives, you'd find your way to that list of contractors.
If I could maybe just add one other piece that we heard from our interviews and focus groups on this, for people that are working on these policies, there was probably even more focus on wanting customer testimonials and ratings, like you would have for any restaurants or Yelp types of things. That is a style of doing due diligence that people are very, very familiar with and very comfortable with, and not having access to that was a point of frustration. So really encourage people to include both accreditation as well as some form of consumer rating in the way that they communicate to homeowners.
Awesome. And we have a question here from the homeowner perspective, and this might bring us right to 12:45. So Michael's wondering, they put their home's annual energy consumption numbers into Brett Screen, and they were surprised to see that natural gas costs just 1/3 of the cost of electricity in BC. So is there any work being done to reduce the cost of electricity in BC as a way to motivate people to make change?
Yeah, so here again, we'll wear the hey, we're just posing questions here kind of thing, but there is certainly the two-tier tariff rate in British Columbia is something that that people are pointing to as a barrier, right? That after a certain base level of consumption, your rate of electricity goes up higher. Like, is that serving our electrification needs? And there are a number of different places like that in our current rate structures, in other factors. Carbon tax will become more of a material thing over time, but it is also just it is a real fact right now. And as a homeowner, experience this to a degree as well. That running a parallel system, I am saving money when I'm using my furnace instead of my heat pump. Except for my furnace doesn't work anymore. That is something that is a structural barrier that has to be overcome, particularly for the homeowners that are struggling to make ends meet.
Yeah, I think we saw that. That's what came out in the research, right? Is that the just being motivated by the climate action is not enough for a lot of homeowners. There's these really practical concerns. So yeah, it's really interesting to see. And I know a lot of people are really excited to see the report come out. I'm sure you'll see a lot of new signups on that mailing list. And so I want to thank you for taking the time to explain this all to us, to show us the data. I think lots and lots of interest in the insights that you've uncovered, and also a lot of interest in, great ideas and ways to work together. So really happy to see that. Thank you both for taking the time. I know it's first thing in the morning on a Friday for both of you. So I really appreciate you coming with your best energy and great enthusiasm. And thank you everyone for joining us. That brings us to the end of our presentation, and have an awesome rest of your Friday.